So keys for confessing and turning from sexual sin. Well, like other kinds of sin, it would be anything that contributed to the decision to sin that way. So you want to pray through the why, that it was chosen. But also, what I wrote here is break, restore, cleanse. When there is unhealthy, like one flesh, let's say, the Bible talks about being one flesh, when there's a sexual intercourse. And so when that's in marriage, that's healthy, that's sanctified. When it's outside of marriage, like it says, don't be one with a harlot, in Proverbs, I think. And so I don't know what happens, but something happens that's not good. And God would like to take care of that. And that's about all I felt like I needed to know about it. So, but what we do is we ask God to break those unhealthy one flesh bonds, and to, if you ever super glued your finger to itself, when you try to pull it apart, it hurts, and if you did it really bad, you might pull some skin off either direction too. If you can use that super glue dissolvent, it works better when it comes apart. And what you're asking God to do is you may already feel ripped apart or whatever, but you're asking God to restore things that were lost, like maybe innocence, and take away things that came, like maybe shame. And there could be a variety of things in there. But you just basically are asking Him to restore to wholeness, take away and bring back, and get rid of those unhealthy bonds. And then developing healthy boundaries. Now, even if it's not sexual sin, like let's say somebody was raped or something, that step there of break, restore, cleanse would still be very helpful. And I'll add a word on sexual abuse right here, that when I pray with people who have been sexually abused, usually when I pray with somebody and I ask God to reveal His perspective into memory, and they've given permission for the process and everything, usually that works well. With sexual abuse, almost every time they say, I can't see God in this memory. And they need to ask God themselves, and just choose by their will, that they would like Him to come into that place in their mind. God's everywhere all the time. So He was there when it happened because He's everywhere, but He did not feel there to them. And in their memory, He's not in that part. And so inviting Him in, and then about 90% of the time at least, then there's a breakthrough in that, and they can see Him. See His perspective. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Any questions about this? I will add, this is related to counterfeit desires. I didn't put it in the simplified version, but there's some stuff online. I think it's in Module 11. And the website's it's on your front page, on the copyright page toward the bottom. It should say www.freeman.org. You see that there? Okay. So anyway, counterfeit desires, you can read more about there if you want. And what you're going after is why they were chosen, what's the true desire, and working those things through with God. There's some steps in there that you could refer to if you want. Okay, keys to developing healthy boundaries. And again, there's more online, but there are two main things. One is, first you got to figure out what they are. How do you have them if you don't know what they are? And the second is to walk them out. I'll give you an example. I was praying with a woman that had been involved in sexual sin. And all she'd been told to avoid sexual sin was, don't be alone in the same house with someone of the opposite sex. So she wasn't. But the other person was sleeping in a different room with the door shut. And it just wasn't enough. You need somebody who can see you at all points of time. That's a healthier boundary. So like when Dave was pastoring, he had a window in his office door, and like you guys do over in your offices, you know, so you're never having that can't be seen thing. So that's just an example. Those can be worked out, and there's ways to find them, and there's more information online. Okay, keys for breaking internal strongholds, of which there are many kinds, like judgments and vows and curses and fear bonds. Fear bonds I didn't know existed until I read about them in the Life Model, Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, which is a great little book. And the difference between fear bonds and love bonds, they're based on fear. An example would be wanting that approval and feeling anxious, like, oh no, am I going to be rejected? You know, that kind of thing might indicate that. But you can read more about that online also. It's in Module 10. And that is in an appendix, which is after that module. Okay, so there's a variety of them, but the keys for this would be identifying, working through the issues, and asking God to break them. And now we're going to look at a few kinds. So negative vows, like, for example, I'll never speak to him again. You want to pray through why that was chosen, and then ask God to break that and give you something healthier that's focused on him. I will say here, sometimes people feel like there's only, two choices. I'm either going to never speak to him again or get hurt, or I'm either going to be too harsh with my kids or too lax with, I'm never going to get angry with my kids kind of thing. My dad got angry. I'll never be like my father. Those need to be broken. That one I'll say, I'll never be like my father. I'll never be like my mother. Guess where your focus is? Wrong place. What you want to do is ask God to break that intensity of focus here and help you to have a healthy focus on him and live according to his perspective. So instead of trying to protect yourself by these things, to hide in him and focus on him. The two choices, feeling like I'm not going to be angry. So you end up being too lax until your kid, drives you crazy one day and you find yourself blowing up. And guess what? Now you're saying I'm becoming like my parents. Or you may just keep acting in the opposite way. But sometimes we think there's only two choices, and we're not seeing that there's a God choice up there that has nothing to do with either of the world's options. And so what's God's choice? And that brings that fuller reality again. Then keys to regarding feeling cursed, like I'll never amount to anything, and I'm just as a simplistic thing here, work through root and related issues, asking God to break and replace with a blessing, and asking for God's protection. Again, these are ones that are going to come at you a little bit like a fire hose. The goal is to be introduced to them and read more about them later, but it's too much to cover in a one-day thing.